Nanjing Belt. Archaeologists opened a sealed 3rd century tomb and pulled out a metal buckle that should not exist there. It looked like a plain belt fitting, but laboratory tests reported the metal was mostly aluminum, a material cheap to make only after the 19th century. If the sample is genuine, the timeline breaks. Scientists offered simple answers. Maybe the tomb had been opened and contaminated long ago. Maybe modern soil seeped in, or the sample was mislabeled. Others ran metallurgical tests and found tool marks and corrosion patterns that match ancient burial conditions. But those results do not erase the oddities. For some, the question is not how the object was made, but how it ended up inside a chamber that showed no sign of tampering. The mystery holds because the sealed context should be a time capsule. The tests answered some things. They also left an uncomfortable gap. The buckle looked like it belonged in a funeral chest, wrapped with bits of cloth and a thin film of burial corrosion. Scientists ran metallurgical scans and found mostly aluminum, with traces of other metals that matched long-term soil interaction. That is where the problem begins. Aluminum is one of the most common elements on Earth, but isolating it as a pure metal needs a large chemical process developed in the 19th century. Some researchers argued the object was a modern intrusion. Others pointed to careful excavation records and to corrosion patterns that form only over centuries. To settle the debate, teams suggested further tests. They recommended comparing trace elements to local ores, checking manufacturing marks under a microscope, and looking for modern tool residues that would show recent tampering. So far, the results are mixed. The chamber was sealed, the context dates correctly, and the metal does not fit the expected technology. The gap remains wide and stubborn. Antikythera mechanism. Divers pried open a corroded chest in a ship's sealed hold and lifted a chunk of bronze gears that rewrote how we think about ancient technology. For over a century, scientists have studied that cluster of interlocking wheels and found it functions like a mechanical calendar and planet tracker. The puzzle is not that it exists. The puzzle is how engineers of the 1st century could machine such precise teeth and assemble them without modern tools. Mainstream scholars say skilled artisans and lost workshops can explain it. Others point to trade of Hellenistic knowledge and incremental development. Still, there are gaps in the chain. Dating of the ship and corrosion patterns match an ancient burial cargo sealed by the sea. If the context is correct, then this device is far more sophisticated than expected for its time. That tension between archaeological context and technical complexity keeps the debate alive. They scraped away centuries of crust, and the gears inside revealed themselves one by one. X-ray imaging showed dozens of precisely cut teeth, nested wheels that matched with astronomical cycles, and tiny inscriptions that tied the object to a Hellenistic workshop. Conservators ran corrosion tests, and the metal's aging fit the shipwreck context. That makes the device ancient. It also makes the device harder to explain. How did craftsmen produce such fine gearwork without modern lathes or hardened steels? Scholars point to lost chains of skill, to specialized instrument makers in coastal workshops, and to gradual improvements handed down through apprentices. Others note gaps in the archaeological record where intermediate examples should appear. Some ask whether the device represents a peak of local ingenuity or a surviving fragment of a much older tradition. The science has narrowed possibilities. It has not sealed the answer. The gears keep turning in the labs, and the silence in the wrecked hold keeps widening the question. Tlaocock bracelets. A cave mapper squeezes through a narrow crack and finds a tiny sealed chamber where 3 thin shell bands sit on a stalagmite as if placed there moments ago. Archaeologists later arrived and recovered the bracelets, a broken fragment, a giant snail shell, a charred piece of wood, and a set of small stone discs. Radiocarbon tests on the burnt wood placed the deposit between 1000 and 1500 AD, a time when the region was active and people used caves for ritual. That seems straightforward until you consider the context. The chamber was cut off by a collapse and untouched until modern explorers pried it open. The bracelets were arranged on a natural column high above the floor, where only someone comfortable in tight black spaces could reach. Scientists ask practical questions. Was this a grave offering, a ceremonial lockbox, or a marker left by a vanished group whose practices we do not understand? The sealed setting makes accidental loss unlikely. The arrangement points to intention. The why is what keeps specialists arguing. The bracelets looked delicate, but the analysis was heavy. Conservators dated the charred wood with radiocarbon methods and placed the deposit in the post-classic period. Specialists examined the shells and found species that matched coastal waters rather than the cave river system. That suggests someone carried offerings from far away and left them deliberately. The placement on a high stalagmite implies skill and intention, not a casual drop. Ethnographers point to ritual gift-giving and cave pilgrimages in nearby cultures. Geochemists recommend isotope tests to trace the shells more precisely and pollen analysis to confirm seasonal timings. Field archaeologists want a wider survey of nearby sealed pockets to see if this was a single event or part of a pattern. For now, the chamber reads like a locked message from a vanished community. Why pick that narrow column and then seal the entrance forever remains the hard question. Hypogeum Oracle Chamber. Archaeologists pushed open a stone threshold and found a room carved from living rock, airtight and eerily still. The place is several thousand years old. Inside were bone fragments, painted walls, and small carved figures left in niches, as if someone had turned a shrine inward and sealed the door. The oddest thing was the sound. A single whisper in that chamber swells into a low, vibrating hum that fills the whole complex. Acoustic engineers measured it and found specific frequencies amplify there more than anywhere nearby. That suggests the space was built with purpose, not by accident. Conservators ran pigment and residue tests and found traces that match ritual use. DNA teams say the bones carry the signatures of local groups, not strangers. So the facts line up. People used the chamber. They sealed it deliberately. The mystery is why they made the room sing and then locked its secrets away. Researchers keep arguing about ritual, control of sound, and a cultural meaning we no longer understand. Scientists measured the chamber with speakers and microphones. A low tone played near the entrance swelled into a deep standing pulse that filled the whole space. The strongest frequencies matched human vocal ranges. Acoustic engineers say the room amplifies sound in ways most caves do not. That points to an intentional shape. Conservators found ochre and residues that match incense, not ordinary smoke. Bones lay arranged near the sound node, the spot where vibration was loudest. That suggests the sound was part of the ritual. Some call the builders acoustic masters. Others warn against romanticizing. Maybe this was practical. Maybe it was sacred. Teams want residue maps, DNA, and sound scans to model what people heard. For now, the room keeps its secret. It sings. The sealed doorway holds the answer. We can date pigments and seals. We do not know why someone closed the chamber and left its music behind. Baghdad Battery. Workers uncovered a sealed clay jar near an old ruin and found a copper tube surrounding an iron rod, sealed with asphalt and wrapped in textile. At first glance, it looks like a crude lamp or a storage jar. Then someone noticed the metal fit and the sealing and suggested it could be an ancient electrochemical cell. Tests show acid residues in some examples and corrosion patterns that match long-term burial. Mainstream archaeologists say these jars were likely for storing scrolls or aromatic oils, and that the metal parts had practical, non-electrical uses. Enthusiasts point to leakage, residue chemistry, and the tight seals, and ask how people could build a working cell before modern chemistry. The real problem is provenance. Many examples came from disturbed contexts or old collections where sealing was uncertain. When a device appears from a sealed deposit, the question becomes sharper. Did someone copy a practical tool from a different culture? Or does something about ancient craft change our assumptions about early chemistry? The sealed jars keep the answer just out of reach. Proponents point to residue inside the jars. Acid traces match vinegar and fermented fruit in some samples. Corrosion on the iron rods looks like long-term electrochemical wear. Replication experiments in modern labs have produced small voltages from similar setups. That is where the intrigue grows. Critics push back. Many jars came from mixed collections or were dug up decades ago with loose records. Contamination is a real risk. Even a tiny modern object dropped into a burial can fool the record. To move forward, teams propose stricter tests. They want fresh, sealed context finds with full chain of custody. They want isotope chemistry on residues and blind replication studies by labs with no stake in the debate. If future sealed jars show clear acid chemistry and consistent corrosion, then the idea of early electrochemistry gains weight. If not, then the battery remains a neat idea built on shaky provenance. Either way, the sealed containers keep their lesson plain and stubborn. Gorham Cave Chamber. Researchers pried open a pocket of rock sealed for 40,000 years and found stone tools and worked shells lying where no modern hand could have reached. The finds fit with Neanderthal occupation layers nearby. Radiocarbon and stratigraphy point to an age that matches late glacial times. That makes the context powerful. The tools themselves are simple, but some show wear and polish that suggest planned use. The shells carry micro marks that hint at cutting or scraping tasks not usually linked to earlier toolkits. Scientists ran residue tests and found traces of animal proteins and plant starches that imply complex diets and tool use. The sealed local context reduces the chance of modern contamination, so the behaviors seem real. That forces a choice. Either we revise what Neanderthals could do, or we find an unexpected process that mimicked those residues after burial. For now, the chamber stands like a quiet witness. The layers are sealed. The evidence asks a stubborn question we do not yet fully answer. They removed the last slab, and the chamber breathed out cold, unchanged air. The stone tools lay where people left them tens of thousands of years ago. Microscopic wear and polish on edges told a quiet story of repeated tasks. Residue analysis revealed animal proteins and plant starches in patterns that match butchery and processing, not random decay. Shell fragments showed cut marks that fit intentional shaping. Because the pocket was sealed, the chance of modern contamination is low, which makes the evidence stronger. Still, scientists debate mechanisms. Some argue natural mineral reactions can mimic organic traces under certain conditions. Others say the patterning across multiple artifacts and layers points to real behavior. Teams propose more tests, blind replication, and expanded excavation of adjacent sealed pockets to see whether this was an isolated episode or part of a larger pattern. If the sealed context continues to validate the traces, then our view of ancient skill and diet must widen. For now, the chamber keeps its quiet testimony, and the question waits. Hidden chamber. Deep under the desert, particle scans picked up empty spaces where stone should be. Teams used cosmic ray scans and sound tests to map cavities without a single stone moved. In Khufu's pyramid, the result was a long, narrow void that did not match known corridors. Scientists call it an anomaly. The chamber is sealed behind massive masonry that has stood for millennia. That makes the finding different from a looted tomb or a collapsed shaft. If the scan is right, then engineers built a hidden space and then closed it away. Archaeologists ask practical questions. Was it structural, a pressure relief, or a secret storehouse never meant to be entered again? Others wonder whether the cavity held objects that later vanished. Some propose simple construction quirks. Some imagine ritual reasons beyond our records. For now, the scans point to a real empty silence. The sealed stone keeps the contents a possibility, and the possibility keeps the debate alive. Teams debated what to do next. Some argued for a tiny borehole and a fiber optic camera to peek inside without disturbing the masonry. Others insisted on non-invasive scans first, more cosmic ray runs, and high-resolution sound mapping to pin down the cavity shape. Engineers model the load plans to be sure any probe will not cause collapse. Historians want to compare building records and nearby tombs for clues about hidden stores. Conservators warn that even a small intrusion risks destroying evidence no modern test can replace. Then there is the chance it holds nothing human at all, just void space left for weight relief. Or it could hold objects deliberately sealed and lost to time. The tension between curiosity and caution is the real story. Whatever lies behind that stone wall, the seal itself became part of the artifact. Scientists will plan slowly and carefully. The empty silence keeps the mystery open, and the world keeps asking what was worth sealing away. San Giuliano Tomb. Archaeologists eased open a stone lid and found 4 people laid with a set of grave goods so complete it read like a family inventory preserved for 2,600 years. Ceramic jars sat by the heads. Iron weapons rested by the sides. Bronze ornaments and delicate silver hair spools glittered as if someone had set them down yesterday. The chamber was sealed, and the sealed context is everything. Radiocarbon on organic remains matched the expected era. Conservators found textiles with fine twists and metals with traces that point to distant ore sources. That raises the real question. How did this community access materials and skills spread across wide trade networks and then choose to bury them in a room they closed forever? Scientists suggest trade, elite display, and ritual closure. Others note tiny manufacturing marks that hint at workshops we have not yet identified. To get answers, teams plan isotopic maps on metals, textiles, and human bones and DNA on the people. The sealed chamber preserves a whole economy in miniature. It also preserves a decision no one left a note to explain. Teams ran isotope maps on the metals and textiles to trace where the ore and fibers came from. Strontium and lead ratios pointed to several regions, some local and some far away, which means goods or people moved long distances. DNA on the bones revealed migrants mixed with locals, not a single village burial. Conservators found tool marks on a sword that match workshop practices hundreds of miles off. The sealed chamber keeps all these threads together. It is a tiny archive that shows trade, craft, and choice. Yet it also hides intent. Why bundle these items and close the door so tightly? Was it a mark of status, a ritual of closure, or a deliberate erasure? Labs will keep testing. Historians will keep comparing. The chamber remains a sealed conversation between past decisions and modern questions. The goods are real. The context is solid. The motive is stubbornly missing. Sangsing Dewey bronzes. Excavators opened sealed pits and lifted enormous bronze masks and strange ritual vessels that did not match the art in the historical records. The faces are large and stylized with deep-set eyes and sharp features, and the casting is unusually refined for the time. Scientists dated the pits to around 3,000 years ago and ran metal analyses that show alloys and casting techniques that surprised even specialists. The pits were clearly sealed as ritual deposits, not random trash. That makes contamination unlikely and the finds more puzzling. Historians say we are looking at a major regional culture that developed styles separate from the central court and then vanished from written records. Others point to networks of trade and lost workshops that we have not yet found. Metallurgists want more samples and lead isotope work to trace ore sources. Conservators want careful documentation before any further removal. The bronze faces are beautiful and alien at once, and the sealed earth keeps their story half-told and stubbornly closed. Conservators worked inch by inch to stabilize the masks and vessels. X-ray and metallurgical studies returned surprises. The bronze alloy contained unusual ratios of tin and copper and tiny traces of elements that point to multiple ore sources. That suggests the people who made these works either had broad trade links or used a mix of local and imported materials. Casting experiments show remarkable control over molten metal and fine surface detail that few expected for the region and period. The pits themselves were clearly ritual deposits. Charred remains and ritual objects lay in carefully arranged groups. Historians say a dramatic local tradition may have flourished and then faded from records. Others suggest contact with distant workshops that shared techniques and ideas. Either way, the sealed earth preserved a moment of cultural complexity that the open record does not show. The art looks familiar and wholly strange at once. The masks stare out from a buried silence that keeps its makers and their choices hidden from us. Galician castle casemate. Workers pried through collapsed masonry and discovered a room sealed for 300 years. Inside were cannon fragments, soot-stained walls, and tools left where they fell. Conservators reported thick black layers on the stone from repeated firing. The layout suggests a small testing room used to fire weapons. That explains the soot and metal, but it raises a puzzle. Why seal a fighting room and never reopen it? Was it buried by a siege or deliberately closed as a ritual of defeat? Archaeologists excavated carefully and found no intrusion. That makes accidental burial unlikely. Experts now combine structural study residue chemistry and historical records of a 17th-century bombing. Some argue it was an emergency closure during war. Others say it was a controlled shutdown to hide munitions. The sealed hole keeps both stories alive, leaving us a hard question. Who decided to lock it away and why? They measured soot layers and metal fragments with spectrometers. Microscopic ash matches black powder used in 17th-century artillery. Carbon dating on charcoal in the doorway fits a recorded bombardment. Structural analysis shows the doorway was closed with rubble from the same collapse, not patched later. That matters. If the closure happened during the attack, the room is a battlefield time capsule. If it was sealed afterward, someone chose to hide or protect its contents. Neither answer fits every test. Chemical analysis shows unusual corrosion on cannon fragments consistent with heavy smoke and salt exposure. Conservators warn that hasty intervention could destroy fragile clues. So teams propose a slow, interdisciplinary plan combining archives, archaeology, chemistry, and engineering before any final opening. For now, the sealed chamber keeps its decision private, and the black stains keep telling a short, stubborn story we cannot yet finish.